Hello and welcome to the Hibernation podcast. My name is Dahyo, and I'm inviting you to join me for a weekly conversation with some of the amazing artists who've decided to stream with us over the course of this festival. Before we start the show today, we'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the custodians of the land upon which we stand. Wherever we are in this country, Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded, and we must be mindful that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. As we share and explore music throughout the festival, we are also on a site that carries the reverberations of many centuries of music and cultural making. Joining us this week is Siân Lindsay. Siân is a Sydney-based composer. She grew up playing clarinet and later developed a keen interest in composing electroacoustic music, writing for small chamber groups with electronics. While completing her bachelor's degree at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, Siân was drawn to the modular synthesizer and has since started improvising and exploring the sound worlds of analog synths. How are you, Siân?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Not bad. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.
Yeah, it was good because I suddenly realized that I needed to record this podcast, and I was like, well, who can we get? Siân. That sounds good. I've been meaning to chat with you in a podcast type thing for ages because of another project that I'm running, which is called Soup, which is with Sydney Uni Radio Group. And I've been meaning to talk to you for ages, but it's just never worked out. And now, unfortunately, Soup's not running this semester, but here you are. So we've finally got it together. How have things been for you? How's the lockdown?
Oh, it's been all right. I actually finished my final uni assignment for my undergrad the day we went into lockdown.
Oh,
So didn't have any uni assignments to do, and also I'm out of work at the moment as well. So I haven't had a lot going on, but I've had Hibernation to keep me busy, which has been
it's been
nice.
good timing, hasn't it?
It really has, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Siân is another one of the co-curators, along with me, Damian Barbara, and Liam Mulligan. But Damian and Liam were curating it last year, and they asked Siân and I to help out this year. So I guess like we have this new experience of coming in the second year, and I guess trying to put our own spin on things. Would you say?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that we're trying to do differently this season of Hibernation is branch out to not just musicians, but all kinds of artists. So it's been fun to think about what other kind of artists I know and reach out to them and see what they've been working on and get them on board for the season.
Have you got any examples that you want to share?
Yeah, so one of them is Ali Sarah, and she's a jewelry maker. So she'll be doing a live stream about like her processes and that kind of thing. So I think that'll be really cool. And another one, we've got another visual artist, Rosie. I'm actually not sure what her last name is, but she'll be doing some really cool visual art stuff as well.
Yeah, well, I'm keen for those. It's sort of nice because there have been other experimental music events that I've been to that I'm not going to name, but I have been to those, and it has very much been like one sort of type of experimental music, and the people, all the same people, like people from either the con or from UNSW, and not much else, I think. Do you know what I mean? Like it's sort of, it's nice to have this idea of expanding out and talking to filmmakers and jewelry makers and visual artists and these sort of people.
Yeah, for sure. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Like the experimental music scene can be quite insular, and it's always the same people going to the gigs, which is great because we all support each other. But it is nice to try and expand on that and to kind of, expand on it for not just being experimental music, but experimental art. And I think it's great to get more people involved.
Well, I feel like a lot of us are kind of interested in performance art as a concept, even more so than music. Experimental music, I think a lot of it comes to experimental performance art, and there's this real, I think, sort of merging between different artistic disciplines and this sort of idea of like cross-disciplinary collaboration. And I think that's been something that has been explored a bit more so in this season than in the last one. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, it's also, I don't know what you think of this, but I think also it's kind of nice to be expanding not just in terms of discipline, but also expanding out from the. I can't speak today, and I'm recording a podcast. Not just in terms of discipline, but also like in terms of the communities that we're talking to. Because a lot of the time, when you've done a recital or a concert at the con, you book out one of the recital halls or something, and
Yeah.
the people who come are all from the con, and there's very much like it's one space that is, it's got this sort of cultural baggage of a recital hall that you don't necessarily see in other places, and I feel like sometimes that can have an effect on how an audience thinks about a performance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think it's really important to, branch out and get people who might not be interested in, or not interested, but like might not usually take an interest in
Might
a
not have.
certain kind of art form. And it's important to be exposed to different things that you wouldn't usually be exposed to.
Absolutely. I think the exposure thing is important as well, because there's this idea of experimental as being something that's potentially like super cerebral or difficult to understand. And I have spoken to people who are like, I'm not smart enough to understand this sort of music, and I don't think that's their fault. That's like our fault that we haven't shown, like brought this music out to a wider audience. And it doesn't mean dumbing down the music. It just means taking it. Sometimes I think it just means taking it out of this really somewhat threatening environment that a concert hall can be sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. Like that really resonates with me. I think a lot of people get intimidated by experimental music because they think that, it's you have to have like this massive education or a background in music to be a part of it. But the fun thing about experimental music is exactly the opposite of that. And you actually just go in with, well, it's kind of like Hibernation's kind of slogan, I guess, which is, a place where you're allowed to make mistakes, or mistakes are encouraged. I can't remember the exact wording.
Well, Maddie Briggs wrote a really fantastic article about us in Oni.
Yeah,
And
I
she
saw
said
that.
she said failure is an option, and that was the sort of mentality. And
That's it. Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of.
I've mentioned this. I think I've mentioned this in every podcast that I've done so far, because I really like this. But I think I like with this sort of music and this sort of experience where it's okay to mess this stuff up sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that if there are a few performances that don't necessarily go to plan, that can make the festival more fresh and exciting, because it's like there's this sort of element of almost danger when you are
Yeah.
tuning into a stream. It's like, is the stream even going to work? Are they
Yeah.
going to have tech issues? Is the thing going to crash halfway through? And obviously, like, we try to avoid those mistakes, but the fact that it's okay and we can move on after something like that happens is. And I'm not just saying that's a Hibernation specific thing. I mean, that's something that I've really enjoyed with engaging with experimental music in general. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're sort of before the virus situation, and the lockdowns and the year of hell, all of that. Before that, you were sort of doing like pub gigs and stuff, right? But with your modular.
No, not really actually. So I had done one gig with the modular before the lockdown.
I think this is the famous one that I heard about.
Right, yeah. It was with Backstage Music.
Yeah.
And it was at the old 505 Theatre in Newtown. So that was kind of when I had just started out on the modular. I had Ben Carey as a one-on-one teacher at uni, and he's obviously really into it, and I kind of was interested as well. So I did kind of like a study piece, which was my first piece for modular synth.
What do you mean by
and
study
it was,
piece?
Like, it was more of me learning about, like, I was learning about the instrument at the same time as writing for it.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't so much of like me trying to like create this like amazing piece of like music. It was more me like trying to be, you know, quite experimental and, you know, let's see what this instrument can do, and let's see what it can do when there's another instrument in the mix as well. So I wrote for modular synth and saxophone.
Right.
And yeah, so it was a kind of study in the sense that it was like, you know, let's just experiment and try things. So yeah, so that was my only gig before the lockdown.
Bad timing.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Because I think we both had Ben for both semesters as our individual teacher last year, right? How has it been, considering you got interested in modular and then lockdown happened and I assume you don't own a modular, how was that not being able to access the university's one?
So I was actually very lucky, and Ben organised for the modular to come home with me for the entire lockdown. So I had the conservatorium's modular sitting in my bedroom for the entire lockdown.
Okay, well that's a pretty good deal then.
It was pretty great, yeah.
I feel like that would be a whole lockdown experience, wouldn't it? Just sort of like sitting in a bedroom and playing with a modular synth until the virus goes away.
Yeah. So I've actually ended up doing more online modular gigs than I have real life.
Well, I remember you did one right at the start of Hibernation last season, correct?
Yeah. So that was an improvisation I did, and I think I used one of the modules called Morphogene, which is kind of like a granulator. Also, I'm very new to modular, so the things I say might not be too accurate, but, you know, you got to start somewhere.
Failure is an option, right?
Exactly. So I used a lot of pre-recorded sounds in the Morphogene and just played around with that on the Hibernation live stream. But the one thing I really liked about doing that gig was like the comfortability that came with it. I usually get really bad performance anxiety.
Right.
But for that gig, I found it so relaxing. I had my two housemates and my partner in the lounge room with their headphones on watching the live stream, but because it was like lagging, they were all watching it at different times. And they were all sitting in front of me and I was kind of like performing to them, but I had headphones on too, so it was kind of like a silent disco.
That's cool. So that was like doing a mini live, like real gig in front of people because you had your housemates.
Yeah, it was. It was like doing a live gig, but just like a really intimate one in front of people that I know very well. So it kind of like took the intimidation part of it away, and it was a lot of fun.
Do you think that's the answer going forward with the performance anxiety?
Maybe trying to channel that energy.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think like I should only do gigs in front of like people that I know very well, but I think trying to like change my mindset about what a performance is, you know, kind of important to getting over that performance anxiety.
Oh, for real. For real. You had the so you had the sort of classical upbringing, musical upbringing. You grew up playing clarinet.
Yeah. So I actually I come from a very musical family. My dad's side is very musical, so he plays trumpet. His sisters play violin, viola, and cello. And when I was 5, I had to pick an instrument to play.
Right.
So I chose the violin because one of my aunties played it and I knew what it was. But then 5 years later, I really hated it and I wanted to play the saxophone. But my dad, being a classical musician, was like, no, if you want to play the saxophone, you have to play the clarinet first. So yeah, I grew up playing clarinet from like year 5 onwards. Yeah.
Do you still play the clarinet?
Here and there.
Yeah.
Mostly for like small things, like if my friends want me to jump on a project and they want some clarinet, I'll do that. But yeah, not too seriously.
Yeah, that's interesting that you had that experience, because I think like I feel like both of us have kind of moved in that same direction. I had the classical piano upbringing, but I wasn't very good. I didn't practice enough to get to the level that you have to. You need to do a certain amount of practice, I think, with piano to get to this
Yeah.
level, and I never got to there. I don't think I ever had that drive.
Yeah.
With the piano, I think it was always, I sort of became a bit disillusioned with it, and that's how I kind of got into composition. And I started off wanting to write film music, and for a while wanting to write for like musical theatre and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
But
right.
then I think we both had this sort of sudden interest in electroacoustic music that has become, I can't speak for you, but for me it's become a bit of an obsession. Like I'm not super interested in writing for acoustic musics unless there's some sort of electronic element
Yeah,
in
for
there.
sure. Yeah.
Where would you say
Same
that
here.
came from for you?
Um, well, so I started composing pretty late in the game, like comparatively to other people, like late high school. I started writing for small chamber groups. I think for year 12, did extension composition and wrote for clarinet, soprano sax, and bass clarinet, I think, from memory. That could be totally wrong. But anyway, yeah. So I started off kind of doing that thing, and my teacher at the time, his name's John Spence. He was phenomenal, really great. He actually got me to. He was really good because he would expose me to all different types of music, and he kind of said, "This is electroacoustic music. You need to have a go at writing something." So I wrote for clarinet and electronics using. I'm gonna have a mind blank. It's like it's Reason.
Reason? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one that's like, it's kind of like almost Eurorack, like it's got that sort of funny interface. And
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I just kind of got really intrigued from there. And then, so that was like, late high school. And then starting at the con, they kind of, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel they kind of give you two paths. One's more like traditional notation or like orchestras, writing for orchestras or chamber groups, and the other one's kind of like electronics.
I
And
feel
kind
like
of
that was
just went down
definitely
that
a
path.
second year sort of thing, right? Because you have that one semester that you have with a private tutor who's an electroacoustic specialist, and then you have the other acoustic specialist. And
Yeah.
I think they do definitely sort of really make the fact that electroacoustic music is an option clear to you,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, so I kind of took that path.
I actually really like the fact that they do that, obviously, because I've fallen in love with electroacoustic music.
Yeah.
Do you still write for acoustic instruments?
Like solely acoustic instruments? No. Like there's always some kind of electronics
Yeah.
in there. Like honestly, I can't remember the last time I wrote for just acoustic
I
instruments.
think it was
probably
for an assignment, right, where you have to.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think is the draw for you with electronics?
I don't know, I find it so like there's just like endless possibilities, and it's kind of like a rabbit hole, and you find a sound that you really like and you want to go further and see what you can then change that sound into, and it becomes something completely different, and then you just keep going and going, and so you've started with one sound. It could be anything from like a field recording of anything, like a frog or something, and you can take that and you can just turn it into something completely different, and I just find that really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Does this this is going to make me sound like a megalomaniac, but there's this real feeling of control, I think, that you have over the sound itself. I think like when you're writing for acoustic instruments, and I think there's a feeling of you write instructions and then a performer will sort of take those instructions and execute them, and create the music that you've written, which is completely a valid way of writing music, and it's the classic way because we haven't had the technology up until like the last 70 years or so. But then when you get into electroacoustic music, and whether you're working with synthesis or with sampling, you have a much finer scalpel. You can sort of carve out the sounds that you want in a much more precise way, and I think that's really fascinating for me. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I fully understand resonate with the idea of having control over it. But also with like modular synthesizer, I find that like another approach as to like why I really enjoy it is because you just kind of, you're making this, like when you're using the patch cables to create different sounds, you're just kind of like creating as you go. And you turn one thing and you're like, oh, that sounds cool, and then you change something and it sounds completely different again, and it's just you just never know what sound you're going to get. So there's like the element of control, but also like
it's unpredictability that comes from sort of more complicated systems than just sitting in front of a piece of paper.
Yeah, for sure.
Would you say that when you're writing for modular, the majority of the pieces, do you plan exactly what's going to happen in a piece of music, or is it more like an improvised performance or somewhere in the middle?
Somewhere in the middle, but leaning more towards improvised.
Right.
So the piece I wrote last year, I just finished writing last year. It was I wrote it. It was based off a verse novel that my sister wrote about my mother's upbringing. So it had poetry that my sister recorded and sent over to me because it was happening in lockdown. And she lived in Melbourne, so she would send me the recordings of her speaking the poetry, and then I would put modular accompaniment to it. So I would kind of have an idea in my head of what I wanted it to sound like with that specific poem, but also would improvise my way to get to that point, if that makes sense.
So you sort of have like certain, when you're planning out the structure of a piece of music, for example, you sort of have certain sections that are like, this sort of stuff is going to be happening in this area, and then you sort of chunk it out like that, and then when you record it, you will sort of execute that plan, and but that leaves sort of space for sort of improvised. I can't think of the word, but sort of like, oh god, my brain's going blank. Impromptu things to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like for example, the verse novel was set in Western Australia, so I wanted to create kind of like a soundscape that depicted that. So I got a sound using the modular that kind of sounded like cicadas, and kind of set that like hot summer's night kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But then also, there'd be words in the poetry that would be really intense. Like it's quite an intensely emotional read. And my sister read it with quite a monotone voice. So there'd be moments where she would be reading something that's quite, poignant, and that would allow room for me to just like really bring out a dramatic sound in the modular. So
was that planned with your sister?
She just kind of started sending me the recordings in that voice, and I thought about it, and I was like, should I get her to re-record them to be a bit more emotive? And then I was thinking that I liked it monotone because it kind of allowed more room for me to move around than have to match what her voice is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really like that. I think that considering your sister was in Melbourne and it was sort of trying to have these images of Western Australia, and you were writing in Sydney, it's like this whole sort of we talk about the technology for electroacoustic music and stuff, but it's also using the internet and all this sort of stuff to help this collaboration between sort of three family members in the way that you're talking about it, right? You, your sister, and your mum, and sort of these ideas of three different places. I don't know if you were thinking about Sydney and Melbourne when you were writing, but considering that was where you both were, there's this sort of feeling of connectedness, even though, we're all in lockdown. I sound like such a hippie now, but but I think like I've found myself thinking, in the last few months, can you imagine if this pandemic happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago or something? Like, I mean, it's like we are lucky that we've got all the resources that we have to do this. Imagine if the internet, I mean, Australian internet sucks, but imagine if it was worse. Imagine if we were still using dial-up and this happened, right? So it
would be a completely different experience.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just one very specific creative process that happened between you and a couple of members of your family that I don't imagine happening in other times and situations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely the most like intimate kind of work I've made, not only because the content was about, my family, but also it was written by my family, and the recordings were by my family as well. And also I don't think like if it wasn't a pandemic, I don't think that like it would still have that kind of intimacy. And it was very like she would send me 3 different poems like a week maybe. Whereas like if we weren't in a pandemic, she would probably have to sit down and do all the recordings in one go and send them to me just one week. But it was like, each week we were having this exchange with each other that I don't think you would get that
in other situations. So
pre-COVID world.
So I guess there are certain blessings that we can take from this.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a decent segue, which I promise I didn't plan, but I was going to ask you about the blind collaboration series that you've been organizing primarily with Liam. Because, we're both doing this co-curator stuff, but I think I've been involved with Minecraft and this podcast and my own art and hour streams, and I haven't really heard much about blind collaboration. So do you want to take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So so Liam came up with this idea to have with the blind collaborations idea, and it was based off this experience that John Cage had, where he collaborated with a choreographer, and they only met once before the actual performance. So they had one meeting, and then some time passed, and then the next time they saw each other was for the performance. So it's kind of that concept, applied to Hibernation, but, a little bit different. So each stream, we have 2 artists that can be, they don't have to be the same kind of artist. So it could be a visual artist with a musician, or a poet with a musician, it could be like anything really. But neither of them know who the other person is. And we give them one word as inspiration, and they have 90 minutes to create something on a live stream together. And they won't necessarily see or hear each other during that time as well. So the audience is just seeing these 2 people creating something off the same stimulus.
So are these 2 people interacting with each other during that 90 minutes or no?
I mean, they can. I'd say they won't because of like lag and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they can look on the website and see each other. But
they're not like in a Zoom call with each other or anything.
No. So they're just both streaming at the same time, and both their streams are just embedded in the website, so they'll be side by side.
That's cool because there's like a sort of element of chance there. So you don't know. There's not the sort of sense of interactivity that, for example, I'm just going to plug myself here, but my weekly streams, the Art and an Hour, are similar, but the difference is, I guess, that I'm actively talking with the other person, so it's about the collaboration. But the blind collaborations is interesting, I think, because it brings this sort of chance of let's say provided they don't even check the streams, so they don't know what medium the other person is working in. They could be a painter or a musician or whatever, and so it's an interesting way of creating something that no one involved in the creative process, including the artists, really knows what's going to happen until you watch it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think I'm allowed to speak about our first one.
Well, yes, we're recording this on Tuesday, but you all of you lovely people at home will be listening to this on Sunday or afterwards. So the first one will have happened, but
yeah. So I think I'm allowed to just talk about that a little bit. So you will have seen that we had Pili, who's a visual artist, and she's working with watercolor, and Lewis, who actually hasn't told me exactly what he's doing, but he usually does a lot of noise music stuff, so I assume it'll be that kind of thing. But today, for example, Liam and I had a video call with Pili just to like talk her through how to set up the stream, and she was telling us that for part of her stream she will be using a hairdryer to dry the watercoloring.
Oh, cool.
And she was like, oh, is that bad though? Like, what if the other person is a musician and the sound of the hairdryer like interrupts what they're doing? And Liam and I were like both thinking at the same time, like,
this is perfect.
That would actually work
because it's
really well
Lewis,
with Lewis. Yeah. But we can't say that, so we were just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. It's all part of the fun. You can use the hairdryer. It doesn't matter.
Well, obviously we haven't seen how it goes yet, but let's hope that she does use the hairdryer and it sort of comes up with some interesting interaction.
Yeah.
Do you know what the theme is yet?
Yes. So they've both been given the word floating.
Have they been given that before the gig, or will that be right, like at the time?
We gave it to them a week ago.
Okay, so they do have some prep time.
Yeah. So they can kind of think about what they might do with that word.
Right, okay. Are you going to be involved in any of them? Yes,
I am. But I don't think I can say too much.
Right, yes. Because it's before the, they'll only have been the one. Do you know who your stream partner's going to be yet, or no?
Unfortunately, I do know, yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's a shame. Do they know?
Yeah. No,
okay,
they
well,
don't.
we won't go too much into that because because we don't want to ruin it for you people.
Yeah.
But
that was unfortunately one of the unavoidable things.
Yes.
It's like, as someone working on,
you're gonna have to, and it's like if there's only one person who you don't know who they're with, obviously it's gonna be, it's not like you can hide that from yourself. How are you feeling about the idea of doing one of those?
I'm excited.
Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting, without giving too much away, to just like, oh man, I really don't want to give too much away. But
it'll be an interesting experience. Should we just leave it there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to go.
I don't want to accidentally say something and then you have to go to all the trouble of editing it out.
Yeah, true. I would rather not do that if I can avoid it. But that's cool. So you've been involved in the blind collaborations things. You're involved obviously in the podcast because we're talking. Yeah. You actually wrote the introduction and now closing music for the podcast. Do you want to quickly go through how that got put together? The bleep bloops?
Yeah, the bleep loops. So I have a folder on my laptop that is full of modular improvs that I've done over the time. So I just scanned through them, found which one I liked, did a bit of automation, put some effects on, and bam,
here we are.
There you are.
That's good because I needed a good 20 seconds of introduction music, and honestly I was not in the headspace to be writing music along with everything else at the time. So I was really glad that you could supply that, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it worked out. I think it definitely suits the vibe of the intro.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
No worries. Yeah, I'm quite proud of the work that people have done on this. I'm just sitting here talking shit, but Liam provided the intro card, and my good friend Emily, she helped me with the After Effects because I'm useless with After Effects. And so I think that whole sort of production side of things really came out well, and I can only apologize about the content. But
No.
I'm
Been
just fishing
great.
for compliments, you know that. But
No, the first one with Josh Shipton, right?
yes,
I listened to that and that was amazing.
I mean Josh is just a lovely man.
Yeah,
Did you caught his stream on Friday, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
That was so cool.
Had you seen Josh before?
I hadn't.
Right.
No, this was my first experience, and I definitely will be going to some of the
Evil Nights, yeah. You
Evil
should do a
Nights, yeah.
performance at Evil. Obviously that's not for a
True.
while, but I've done a couple, and
Yeah.
they are a lot of fun. It's a really good community sort of experience, and it's just it's a nice sort of environment. You know, it's a pub gig. It's in Erskineville, at Mosh
Yeah,
Pit,
right.
and the Mosh Pit staff are really lovely, and it's nice to have like. So I have a friend. The first time I went to Evil was to see Justice Yeldham, a Sydney
Nice.
noise artist. I love that guy. But I was going to see him, and I dragged a friend along with me who was into death grips. He'd never really looked into experimental music in that way before, but he was into death grips. And I was like, well, Justice Yeldham was on a death grips album. Do you want to come? And he was like, yeah. And he was expecting the gig to be full of just sort of like 16-year-old death grips fans, but it was actually full of just, honestly, a lot of middle-aged and older people who just happen to enjoy experimental music and come to these gigs once a month.
Yeah, nice.
And that was a sort of environment that I really wanted to try to emulate with Hibernation, because it didn't feel
nice.
pretentious or, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, from what I heard, it sounded like, this really, like, welcoming
Well, it sounded like a
community.
cult, but
A cult that I want to be a part
yeah,
of.
I think we are all a little bit in a cult here, right? Like,
Yeah. No, but yeah, I would,
I think, yeah, and
I would love to do it.
you should talk to Josh. Shoot him an
Yeah, I
email,
will.
and I'm sure I'll fit you in at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've kind of run out of time. The last podcast, which was an hour long, I wasn't planning on that, but it took my poor computer, like 3 hours to render out the video. So I don't want to torch my computer anymore. And but thank you very much for coming on. It's been
worries.
interesting, sort of having this experience, because I think we've always been sort of tangentially aware of each other at university and in the community, but I don't think we've really interacted that much before. So it's been been good to get to know you over the course of this somewhat stressful period.
Yeah, likewise. It's been really nice to get to know you
it's
too.
been
Yeah, because I
interesting.
think we knew each other peripherally, but
Yeah, we sort of both. I think like we did that one live electronic music performance class.
yeah. But that was
That was in lockdown as
that was
well.
that was over Zoom,
Yeah.
so
And I think we both knew that the other was being taught by Ben, but yeah, it's definitely been an experience.
yeah. Yeah, it's been I think a really rewarding thing to have in this weird time,
Yeah,
like it's something to look forward to and something to
keep
you
you busy
busy.
and stop you getting depressed.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people as well that are jumping on for their own live streams as well. Like, it's a bit of kind of a light in the dark.
Yeah, well,
For
hopefully,
few people.
like hopefully we can provide that, because it's not the most fun time for musicians in general, and especially for
Yeah.
this sort of very community-based experimental music. It's not been the best. So listeners, tell us if we've done a good job. I hope we have.
Yeah.
And obviously none of this would be possible if people weren't listening. So thank you very much again to everyone who has tuned in. We really appreciate every single one of you. It's not the best time at the moment. Case numbers are going up, and lockdown's going to go forever, and there's no vaccines on the horizon, so it's not the best time. But so I hope everyone at home is sort of staying safe and keeping a positive outlook, and as Josh Shipton would say, staying strange. So
Yeah.
I think we'll have to sign it off there. Thanks again, Sean, for coming on with us.
No
And
worries.
yeah, stay safe. We'll see you next time.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.